Hey everybody, I want to talk today about Qlik Core. It just got released, a product that just got released from Qlik in general availability out of the beta. And I have a special guest today with me to talk about it. We're going to show you guys kind of what Qlik Core is and really quickly how to use some tools to load data into it and actually analyze data with it. So with me on the phone is Brian Munz from Qlik. He is the head of developer relations there. So hello, Brian.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good. Thanks for joining me.
Yep.
So before we jump into this thing, I want to talk about what is Qlik Core. So that's my question for you, Brian, is what exactly is Qlik Core?
Qlik Core, it's pretty simple. What we realized at Qlik is that the bread and butter of our products have always been the engine, the analytics engine, and the associative data capabilities of the engine. That's really kind of what gives all of our products its power. And as we kind of expanded the developer offering, we would give people some access to the engine right through extensions. People started making kind of mashups or whatever you want to call it, and wanting to embed the product more and more. So with Qlik Core, what we're really trying to do is bring those capabilities to the developer. And so what we did is pretty much isolate the engine. So there's no Qlik Sense on top of it. It's a new product. It runs within Docker, so it's extremely scalable. And what we wanted to do is make it as light as possible. We also thought about all aspects of it. We wanted to make it affordable for developers. We wanted to make it free to try. And so with Qlik Core, what you can really do is get data inside this engine, scale it up however you want, and then within your web application or whatever it is, piece of software, you can then actually use the analytics engine for its powerful capabilities in kind of a very, very light way. And so, in essence, like I said, it's our first kind of full foray with a product into the developer space.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on that a little bit and just clarify a couple things because Qlik has such a strong BI community and group of business intelligence developers that it's built up over the years with its products like QlikView and QlikSense. And so I think a lot of these people get very excited when they hear, hey, Qlik has this new product. And so there's a lot of buzz around Qlik Core. But when Brian says like developers here, what he really means is like software developers. And it's a key distinction. Whereas like QlikView and QlikSense is very useful for BI developers who are very comfortable with tools for data analysis like Qlik and Excel and maybe even R if you're a more advanced analyst. Qlik Core itself is really a kind of software development version of that, an ability to kind of build your own products or build Qlik Core into your own kind of pipelines and things like that. So I think you'll see kind of how that's advantageous today if you're trying to kind of use the engine of Qlik, as Brian mentioned, to power some sort of custom experience or integrate in some other kind of technology that you already have. So let's jump right.
Yeah, and that's a good point in terms of like there's web developers and there's programmers and then there's Qlik developers, and so we're really trying to you'll see here in a few minutes that it's very developer centric. So a lot of the stuff that Spears is going to be doing is pretty common for your modern web developer, and you running things in a console, a terminal, and things like that. It may seem like a lot of hands-on stuff, but that's kind of what we want. We want to be able to hook into whatever application, whatever piece of software this developer is using, so that we can be very flexible and light. And so, in that way, that's a good point. It's very, very developer-centric.
Very cool. All right, so we're going to start moving quick here. I just want to show you today kind of how to get Qlik Core running on your machine and how to load data into it and actually work with it. This video will have links to the code in the description, so you can go back and review the code yourself as we move through this. So Qlik Core runs in Docker containers, and so we can spin up these Docker containers using tools like a Docker Compose file, for example. And there's a lot of nice examples that Qlik provides. If I go into the getting started, and there's kind of like a hello Qlik Core example here, and I can go click on that or hello data and look at how they're setting up their instance. So if I go to the actual repository where this is coming from, if I can find it. Let's see.
Yeah, we basically also have really started to try to get into the open source world. So you'll notice a lot of this stuff, tutorials, even Enigma.js, which is our main programming language, all that stuff is open source. So we're really trying to kind of get ourselves out there and start really engaging with that community.
Yep. So there's a core getting started repo that has a bunch of examples. If I go into kind of the source, there's like the Hello Engine example, and it has some code on how you'd interact with that engine. Now, at the top of the house is a Docker Compose file that's going to show me kind of how we could set up Qlik Core. So you can pull up an image from Qlik Core/engine with an engine version, and we can start to use parameters to hook into certain things. So I'll talk through that as I build one. So you can find the images at dockerhub.com/r/Qlik Core, and you'll find there the Qlik Core engine image. And that's where you can find things like the tags of the images that are available. So the most recent one is 12.225.0. So that's what we're going to use. So what I'm going to do is just create a folder on my desktop. We'll just do it there, called load core. And we are going to just go ahead and open a text editor there, a code editor, so we can work with this data. And let's go ahead and create a Docker Compose file. And I'm going to basically copy and paste what they have what's in that example Docker Compose file. But I'll talk you through kind of what the parameters are there. We do need to also modify it slightly. So my Docker Compose file is kind of telling Docker I want to use this image for the engine. We're going to use this version 12.225.0. We need to accept the end user license. So we're going to actually replace, they have a little variable here, but we're going to replace this with yes. We want to accept the license. We need to map the port of the container, the port that the engine, where we can interact with the engine, to our actual machine. So we have 19076 here. I'm just going to change this to 7 just in case I might have some other images running on that other port. We also need to mount data volumes to our engine if we're going to interact with the file system. So essentially, we want to kind of load a file off the file system into Qlik Core and then save a QVF file, which is the file format for Qlik, back onto disk. So we want to have a way to access that, and this is what this volume mounting does. It's basically going to say like, hey, a data folder in here is going to map to like a data folder inside the engine. So what I'm going to do here is actually create that folder so we have it. So we're referencing this local folder, and it'll map to this folder here. Now, one other thing we need to do is actually create a document directory. It's an important step as well. So we need to tell the engine when it spins up that for its document directory, which is where it interfaces with QVFs and saves them and things like that, kind of where it reads and writes from, we want that to be the data folder. So we'll save that. And now to run this engine, it's actually pretty simple. I'll just bring up a terminal here in my window. And we will run Docker Compose up. And we'll run it kind of silently in the background, so we'll use the -d parameter. And it's going to create this engine, and now it's running. And so if I do like a quick Docker PS, I'll see I had another engine that I've been running for about 4 weeks now in an older version, but now this current version is running up 3 seconds. You can see here. It's forwarding that port to the 97.6 port, and it should have this document directory that it's going to leverage and all that kind of stuff. So we have the engine up and running. Great. Now we can actually interact with it. So the engine API is all documented on qlikcore.com. So if you go there, or core.qlik.com, excuse me, you can go to the services section and read all about how you can use the engine. It uses a kind of a JSON RPC API via WebSockets. So really any language that uses WebSockets you can interact with. Today we're going to do JavaScript using a library called RxQ. We're going to try to load in the 2015 street tree census data from New York. This is basically a census that's done every few years in New York where they go and collect data about the various trees in New York, and they have attributes like where's the tree located, what's the size of the tree, like the diameter of the stump and the height, and what type of tree, etc. So it's about 684 records with 45 columns in it. I've already downloaded the CSV, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that into the folder. But what we're going to do is try to load this data, and then once it's loaded and saved to disk, we're actually going to interact with it and just calculate maybe like what the average stump diameter is of all the trees in the data set. And here's a little preview. You can see kind of what we can expect from this data. So let me just go ahead and grab that data set real quick. There's the tree census data. I'm going to move it into that folder we created. Put it in the data folder so we have access to it. I'll go ahead and rename it just to make my life easier later. We'll call this the 2015 tree census.csv. Cool. So now we can actually get started with the data loading piece. So I'm going to install a few dependencies that I need to actually do this project. The first one's going to be RxJS, which is just a library for reactive programming. I'm also going to install RxQ, which is a library for doing kind of engine API, Qlik engine API reactive programming. And that might be it for what I need. So I'll go ahead and install those locally. And while that's doing its magic, I'm going to create a new file here that'll be kind of our JS file. We'll just call it index.js. So I'm going to load a few things. What I want to do first is just establish a connection with this engine. So let's confirm that that's happening. So to do that, I'm going to load a function called connect session from RxQ. And so what connect session does is it takes a configuration file that basically tells it where to find the engine. So in our case, our engine is hosted locally because we're just running core on this machine. And the port is that port we set, which is 19077. And we can just kind of stop there for now. There are other parameters you can use if you're using like security and other kinds of things. But the simplest kind of configuration is just a host and a port. So to create a kind of an engine session, what I can do is just say the session equals connect session config. What this will do is RxQ will go ahead behind the scenes and take that configuration information to establish that WebSocket session with the this engine running locally. We can confirm that's happening by actually looking and maybe just like asking for something like the engine version just to confirm that it's working. So off of the session, what RxQ provides you is an observable for the global class of the engine. Now this is documented in Qlik. We're going very quickly today, but what I'm doing here is getting observable of the global class, and what I want to do is ask that global class, hey, what engine version is this engine kind of running on? So what I could do is I could say, okay, let's take the global dollar and let's kind of pipe, and RxQ actually has some other helper functions like QAsk and QAsk replay, which we're going to leverage later, where that you can use to kind of ask it for API calls. So I can say, okay, take the global class coming out of this thing and ask it for the engine version, which is a documented API call. And what I'll do is subscribe to the result of this observable and just kind of log it out. Save that, and if this all worked properly, I'll call node index. Cool, so it came back and said, okay, 12.2 to 25.0. So there's our most basic interaction getting the engine version. Now we're going to ramp things up a little bit. We're going to go a bit quicker here because we don't want to just get the engine version. What we really want to do is actually like load data. And loading data into Qlik requires kind of a few different steps. And so let's kind of just document them real quick and then we'll fill in what we need to do. So the first step is we need to actually create the application, right? We don't have an application for this yet, so we need a QVF that we can actually put the data into. So we'll create the QVF. Once we've created the QVF, then we'll need to create what's called a data connection. So a data connection basically tells the QVF, hey, here's a source where you can grab data from. That could be a database. It could be like a web API somewhere. In our case, we're going to use a local connector, right? We just want to load a file directly off of disk, so we're going to create a connection that references this folder that we mounted in our container. Once we've created the data connection, we're also going to create a load script. So a load script is basically like how you tell Qlik the series of commands to execute to actually load data, like what file to load from the data connection, what format to expect that file to be in, what columns to take, any other kind of clauses you want. You can think of it, it has a very kind of SQL-esque type of syntax to it, so it's basically kind of writing a load statement based on this connector that you're working with. Once we've done that, then we want to actually execute that. So we want to execute the load script, which is called doing a reload. So we'll reload the application with the new kind of load script. We'll go ahead and save that application when it's done reloading. And then we're going to, just for fun, once we've done that to confirm it's all working, we're going to like get the average stump diameter that we saw in there. I think I got all that right. Brian, did I miss anything there?
No, I mean, one thing I wanted to note too is, first of all, one of the really great things about Core is that, like you can see here, you're using React, you're using ArcsQ, and basically the engine is pretty like light as it is, and so you could put like you put this on top, you could put the Enigma, you could put Go, Python, whatever it is. And so in that way, I think it's very cool that you can fit kind of into whatever your environment is as a developer. The other thing really quick is also like to create QVF. There's also the ability to have like session apps as well. So if you have kind of a lighter data set, especially, what you could do as if your site needs to scale up and things like that is you can just spin up a session app that disappears after the user is done kind of interacting with the engine, and that's kind of another option. But typically, what Spears is showing here, a lot of the larger or more kind of the better deployments will often store the data in some kind of repository and then do reloads as it goes like this. So
exactly. Cool. Okay, so I did miss one step here, which is after I've created the QVF, I need to actually open it. Totally forgot about that. So we're going to fill in all these different pieces. As Brian mentioned, you can do this in like all kinds of languages. He mentioned Go, Python. There's a .NET SDK. So anything that can really work with WebSockets can do this stuff. We're just going to use JavaScript and reactive programming today as an example of how to do that. So what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to use reactive programming to kind of create all these steps in kind of isolation and then concatenate them all into a pipeline that we can execute. So it's a kind of a cool feature of this style of programming. So I'll show you how we do kind of each of the steps individually, and then we're going to kind of put those together into one long pipeline that we can execute and get our final answer out at the end. So to create the QVF, we are going to use an API call called create app. So very easy, and that call comes from the global class. So we'll call this kind of the create app event, and we'll say to create the app, we'll just take the global class that we're getting in this observable, and we're going to call QAsk of the create app function call with the name of the application. So we'll just call this treecensus.qvf. And this will get done. So we'll just have that like that. Okay, so what this will do is if I was to subscribe to this and like execute this, it's going to go there and create this app, treecensus.qvf. Okay, so let's assume that that's happened. Once that's happened, then what I really want to do is actually have access to the QVF. So I'm going to create a variable called document. It's another alias for kind of application in the Qlik world. What I'm going to do is say, okay, take the global handle and just like ask to open an application. So from the top of the class, like open something called treecensus.qvf. Now, I'm actually going to use a function here called QAskReplay. This has to do with kind of how reactive programming works, where it doesn't share the results with multiple kind of subscribers unless you explicitly tell it to, and this is what the QAskReplay is for. So essentially, if we go down the line here, to create a data connection, I'm going to have to use the document observable. To create the load script, I'm going to have to use the document observable. To reload and save and get this, all these things are going to leverage that document observable. So I want all of these things to share the same kind of opened application. So QAskReplay will enable that kind of multicasting is really what it's called. So one value being shared with all these different processes downstream. So let's go ahead and do the data connection part. So to create the connection, we will, again, create an observable that is going to take the document, and it is going to ask it to create connection. And then we give it some parameters in the connections. And just real quick, so you understand, like, where am I getting this information from? How do I know to make these API calls? I mean, beyond just the experience, having worked with the API before. If you go into the actual associative engine API, the Qlik's API here, you'll find all these classes like global and doc, and if you click on them, you'll find all the methods you can call. So for example, we're going to call the create connection method on the doc class. And when you look at that create connection, it's going to tell you, hey, it needs a parameter of type connection. So you can go click on connection, and then you'll see the connection is something that requires an identifier, it requires a name, a connection string, which tells you the type, whether it's like a driver connection or a local connection or a web URL, etc., all this metadata. So we're using kind of that as our guide here. So based on that, we can do something like say, okay, the name of this connection, we'll just call it our data. The Q connection string, we're going to use a local path specifically to /data, which we mounted to our container before. And the Q type is a folder connection. And that's really the bare minimum we need to get this connection working. So this will create the connection in the QVF for us, which is good. Now the load script. Before we kind of create the load script, we should probably kind of define what that load script should be. We could also just create it in line, so maybe we'll do that. What we'll say is we want to run a command called set script. And that set script command is going to use the document again. So we're going to say, okay, with that application that we've opened, let's set the script. So we'll say, okay, qask set script. And then we'll create a Qlik load script. So I'm just going to create it in line right here. Again, this is all kind of in the documentation. So if you're new to Qlik, this may seem unfamiliar. If you've been doing Qlik for a while, then this will seem extremely familiar. So creating a load script, we'll write a load statement that looks something like this. We'll say, we want to load all the records and all the fields from a location from our data connection. So the way we reference a data connection is using this kind of lib : / syntax. And we reference our data connection, which we call data up here. So these need to match. And then from there, I can reference files under that kind of data connection. So in our case, we name the file 2015-treecensus.csv. So I will create that, put that string in there. And then if you look in the documentation for the Qlik load script, you'll see, okay, I need to kind of give it some metadata about how to parse that file. Like, what's the delimiter in the CSV? Is it commas, or do I need it to be something else? Is it text? Are there labels embedded and things like that? So from looking at the sample from the tree census kind of website where I exported the data, I could see that it was text data. I want to do UTF-8. I want embedded labels. And the delimiter is in fact a comma, as you'd expect with the CSV. And so that gives kind of Qlik the metadata it needs to ingest this file, to load this file. So setting the script is just kind of telling Qlik, here are the instructions to load the data. It doesn't actually load the data. It just kind of saves the instructions on how data should be loaded when you call a reload. So that next step then is to actually call that reload.
Yeah, and just really quick, what you might notice as you go into the getting started documentation for Qlik Core is there's a library there called Halyard, which is kind of meant to be an abstraction of some of the, basically for these easy for developers. So to load your CSV into the data, but I think the point to be made is, like, the Halyard does a lot of stuff and it does it well, but if you then kind of progress as a developer and using Core, and you kind of start really looking into our load script, you can kind of see this as a path as you work with Core, that if you maybe you start with Halyard and you load in data, you connect to data, you can do that with Halyard too. But if you then begin to learn Qlik's scripting language, it really opens up this whole world that has been thriving for a while of all kinds of crazy stuff you can do with the load script in terms of not just loading data, but manipulating it as it comes in, and taking disparate data sets from various places and kind of unifying them in one place. That's a really powerful capability that if you're a developer kind of starting with it, as you learn this load script, it really, really kind of doubles the power, I would say, of what the engine can do.
Exactly. Like, you don't necessarily need to transform your data before you do this step we're showing today of loading Qlik data. The Qlik load script has capabilities like where clauses, it has joins, it can do mappings and load cross tables and things like that. So it's got a lot of advanced features that you can leverage if you want to, meaning that you then can use that load script as a place to transform your data or wrangle it and not necessarily need like a third-party tool in front of it if you choose. And I'm just showing Halyard here real quick, which is a very useful library that, as Brian mentioned, kind of abstracts some of the stuff I'm showing you. Today I'm showing kind of the low level, like what even Halyard's doing under the hood, like what are the actual engine calls that are being made. So let's go back here. Reloading the application is pretty simple. So we'll just call this the do reload event. And again, all of this acting on the document handle. We're just going to ask it to do reload. And finally, we'll save the application. And this is also a pretty simple call. We'll just say, ask the document to do a save. Now the last piece is getting that average stump diameter, like once this whole thing is kind of executed. So what we'll do is there's actually a function in the API. If we go back to the document class, let's go back here, called evaluate and evaluate expression. We'll just do the first evaluate, which will give us back a kind of numeric answer. Evaluates an expression, returns the result as a string. Or actually, we want the second one. Evaluate x is the one we want. So we'll put the kind of expression in. So Qlik has a syntax for doing formulas, and this will kind of give us a result back out. If I look at that tree census data, that field name I was looking for was stump_diam. So what I can say here is, okay, let's do average stump diameter. And that, again, is going to use the document observable and say, with the document observable, ask it to evaluate expression. And that expression will be, we're just going to put some Qlik syntax in here, which is fairly simple. We're going to ask for the average of the stump diam. Okay.
Yeah, I think something that's interesting here too is that it's 645,000 rows of data. So I think you'll see it's pretty fast. Also, just something to mention, if you're new to Qlik, the expression syntax, it pretty much it's very similar to the syntax for Excel. So again, the proprietary syntax that is going to be different. And again, that's another aspect where I think if you're a developer using Core, you grow into all of the powerful capabilities within the expression syntax as well.
Right. So let's go ahead and link all these things together. So right now, these commands aren't actually executing anything. So observables are by default cold, which means like they don't really execute their pipelines, if you will, until you actually have an event that kind of subscribes to them and it basically causes them to execute. And once they're executing, then they'll start to push data down the pipeline. So what's cool about that is that I've kind of created these different pieces of the pipeline, and now I can just kind of combine them in the order that I want them to run. So to do that, I'll use a function from RxJS, which is the reactive programming library we're using in this example today. And that function is called Concat. And so what Concat allows us to do is to take these different pipelines and basically say, like, put them in order, in execution order. Like when this one finishes doing its thing, then go on to the next one, and then go on to the next one, and go on to the next one. So what we should see here is that we can, at the end of this file, we can go ahead and say, let's concat all this stuff together. So the first thing we wanted to do was create app. So we'll say create the application. When that pipeline finishes, go ahead and do the open that app. When that thing finishes, go ahead and create the connection for the app, or for the data load. When that finishes, go ahead and set the script, the load script, so the instructions to load the data. When that finishes, let's actually reload the data. When that gets finished, let's actually save that file out. So we just have that data saved. We don't have to load it again for future things. And then finally, when that's done, let's go ahead and just like calculate the stump diameter. So that's in itself a whole chain. It's not going to execute unless I kind of give it a subscriber to kind of say, okay, execute this event and do something with the result. So what we're going to do is we are going to subscribe to it, and we're just going to like console out the results of what's happening. So every call we're going to get back from this step, we're going to kind of see going to the console. We'll see like that the app got created, that the app got opened, that a connection got made, etc. And finally, the last one will hopefully be our stump diameter. Also, this is very helpful, is I'll put in an error catching thing as well. So if we did something wrong here, we'll catch that error, and we'll see what that is. So let's give it a whirl and see what happens. Oh man, open app is not defined. We're already off to a good start. Oh yeah, document dollar, duh. Okay, so document dollar is kind of what opens the application. So let's go ahead and do that and run this again. It's also the method is called open app, not open doc. So we got create app, but open doc. So we got that going here. And let's give it, you'll actually see that it did create the application. I'm just going to go ahead and remove it so we can see the whole pipeline execute. But you can see our first step actually did work properly. So at least we know we're off to the right direction. Okay, so it's doing some stuff. It's working. This string here represents something. I think that represents the connection. This set script just means that it did set the script. It's doing the reload. Okay, the reload completed. That's true, means it was successful. And now it's kind of saving it to disk. So we'll hopefully see a true back when it gets finished saving to disk.
Yep.
And then there's the final value, right? So the average stump diameter in this data set is 0.43246. And if I look at this file, like on disk here, we'll see that the file has been compressed down significantly. Actually, that's one other advantage of Qlik, is that it can compress the data pretty well. So it's a 220.4 megabyte CSV file, and it was able to kind of compress that down to 75 megs. That's pretty cool. And just to show real quick what that looks like now that we have the file, let's see what would it look like if we just wanted to get the average stump diameter without some of these other things going on. So what I can do here is actually just say, we'll comment this out, and we'll change this to just say, just take the average stump diameter and log that out. So what this is going to do is we're going to do a cold kind of start of like opening this already existing application and getting the result back. App already exists. Did I not save this? I probably didn't save this. Let's try that again. There we go. So very quick, right? It was opening that document that had 600,000 or almost 700,000 rows in it, 45 columns, pretty much instantly, and then got that number back for us very quickly as well. So pretty cool example of what Qlik Core can do.
Yeah, I think the way that you structured the code here is pretty smart in terms of, sometimes it's like, well, why didn't you just kind of just make these calls as they go? But you can see as you do the Concat that enables it. So like, yeah, the first time this script code runs, it creates the app. And then you would imagine like in future deployments or of this application, if you were imagining this becoming something much larger, you could then take those pieces and only run them when they're needed. You don't have to obviously create the app if it already exists, that kind of a thing, and you can get yourself more efficient. So that's just more about how I love reactive programming. So
yeah, exactly. There's a lot of cool tricks you can do with reactive programming that I didn't necessarily show today, but maybe in some future videos we'll show some like advanced techniques where you can do some pretty complex operations with the engine and with your UIs and things like that in some very kind of simple declarative ways in your code. Cool. So I'll post this code online. I hope it's a good example for getting people started with how to actually get data into Qlik Core and work with it. Brian, you want to add anything before we go?
No, I think this has been good, and hopefully you've been able to see kind of some of the core, so to speak, some of the core capabilities of the product and how it can kind of it's pretty easy to spin up programmatically, and you can kind of have it fit into your system. I mean, of course, Spiros likes to use RxQ because he's one of the people who built it, and so that's great because it fits nicely into his wheelhouse. And so yeah, I just think this has been a really nice example. So nice job.
Exactly. Cool. Thanks. I'll also mention, because Brian should be very proud of the work on Qlik Branch and Qlik Playground are two websites that are kind of can help you get up to speed on some of this stuff. They're kind of the communities built around these kind of Qlik APIs. So besides going directly to the documentation like we showed today, check out those websites as well. And I'll link to all that in the video description. So all the resources we showed today and more will be there to help you get started. All right, Brian, appreciate you joining the call with me today.
Oh, thanks a lot. It's been great.